Good evening and welcome to Club Book with Lauren Fox. My name is Stacy Hendren. I'm manager of the Northtown branch of Anoka County Library, which is in Blaine. I have the great honor of hosting our featured guest and moderating questions tonight. So before I introduce Lauren properly, allow me to tell you a bit more about the unique series that is bringing her to you. Club Book is a program of MELSA, the Metropolitan Library Service Agency, made possible through the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and coordinated by Library Strategies, part of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. Anoka County is the co-organizer of this evening's talk. Thanks also to partnering bookseller Red Balloon Bookshop. A purchase link to Send For Me, which I cannot recommend highly enough, will be available in the comment section of this live feed stream. Have it shipped, pick it up at their lovely store in St. Paul, or have them deliver it personally to your door if you're in the area. I loved reading Send For Me and already have multiple people on my list that I'm going to be sharing my copy with. Hi, Mom. One final housekeeping note, also in the comments, you'll see a survey link. MELSA would greatly appreciate hearing what you think about this club book program. It's quick and easy. And by filling out the survey, you also help ensure that we are able to continue to provide this type of high quality arts and cultural programming into the future. Bill numbers are coming soon, but please ask your legislators to support library legacy funding. Without further ado, Lauren Fox is an acknowledged master of the family novel. Readers enjoyed their first taste of her achingly funny take on marriage, friendship, and domesticity in Still Life with Husband, a literary debut that New York Times heralded as the arrival of an immensely gifted writer. Fox's follow-up, Friends Like Us and Days of Awe, justified the praise. Her latest out February 2nd is Send For Me. In this time-jumping work of historical fiction, a woman discovers a cache of old letters from her Jewish grandmother that sheds light on her family's struggles and fate during the rise of Nazism in Germany. Booklist touts Send For Me as a thoughtful, character-driven exploration of the unbreakable bonds of motherhood, which deftly moves between generations as Fox illuminates the way that choices echo through the lives of those who come after. Send For Me is also semi-autobiographical in nature, inspired by heirloom letters held by her own family. After a short presentation and reading by our guest, we'll have time for audience Q&A. Simply drop your questions in the comments thread here on Facebook, and our tech manager will route them to me. If you prefer to ask a query more anonymously, you can also send a private message to Club Book here on Facebook, or send an email to clubbookmn@gmail.com. Please join me in welcoming Lauren. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm so happy to be here. So I'll start I'll do a little presentation about the book, and I'll start just by reading the first page, just to kind of get us in the space of the book. The first line of the book is from one of the letters, and then it begins. I can hardly speak. It starts with the panic, the sound of sharp knocking, the pounding on Annalise's door, a crash in her skull, jolting her from sleep. They're coming. Her heart slams and she sits up, blind in the darkness. Her arms reach out. Where is the baby? Fear floods her lungs. She's drowning. They're coming. Breathe. Hold the baby close. Keep her quiet. Is there something else in the churning flood of terror? In the squeeze of panic, the slightest slackening? Relief? She's been waiting so long for this moment, dread her constant companion, and now it's here. Whatever horror is about to befall her, she won't have to fear it any longer. In the room, silent now, she strains to hear. Her heart is pounding so hard her body is thrumming, her hands trembling. Is that her husband next to her, snoring softly? Is that the warm, reassuring shape of him? They will take him too. They'll take all of it, everything and everyone she has ever loved, in an instant, a flash. Years will pass, a long, surprising slant of light, and this terror will abate. She will pick her daughter up from school, stand in her kitchen with her hands on her hips, sip from a glass in the evening, slip under smooth sheets. But this will always be her frozen moment, the definition of her days. They will always be pounding on the door in the middle of the night. They will always be coming. Send for Me is about 4 generations of women. It begins in Germany on the cusp of World War II, and it moves forward in time to present-day Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The book is about a Jewish family that is torn apart by the rising anti-Semitism in Germany in the late 1930s. It's about the people who got out of Germany just in time and the ones who were unable to leave. It's about the ways we are connected to one another and how we love each other. It's about mothers and daughters and generational trauma, the ways our family stories are passed down to us, not always overtly, but sometimes as the complicated and unspoken undercurrents that we inherit. The novel tells the story of Anneliese, a young mother who, with her husband and daughter, flees Germany in 1938, but is forced to leave the rest of her family behind. The story jumps ahead to present-day Milwaukee, where Anneliese's granddaughter, Claire, is a young woman trying to pry herself apart from her family's history. She's a little aimless and unsure of herself, deeply connected to her own mother, and uncertain of how to live an independent life, weighed down by the heavy burden of loss that in some ways defines her family. It's a personal story for me. It's close to my heart because it's based on my own family. My mother and grandparents left Germany in 1938. They left most of their family behind and settled in Milwaukee. I grew up in a really close family, very loving and connected, but always with some sense that there were things I couldn't talk about, questions I wasn't supposed to ask. I've written about this before, but I remember standing in my grandparents' kitchen, gathering up all my courage and asking them if they ever wanted to go back to Germany. My grandmother stood with her back to me, cooking, and didn't say anything. And my grandfather, after a long while, just quietly said no. So I knew about German history, of course. I knew about the history of the Holocaust. I knew where my family came from, but I never really understood what it meant for us in my own family. I was in my 20s when I stumbled upon the letters. My grandparents had been living with us when I was in high school and college, and they had recently died, and all of their belongings were in my parents' basement. So one day I was going through their things and I found a box full of letters. I still remember the moment, finding the box, the letters, a little wooden box of letters wrapped in a pink ribbon. The letters were in German, in a script I couldn't read, but I knew I had stumbled on something important and meaningful, a key that would unlock something for me, although at the time I wasn't sure what. I was in graduate school at the University of Minnesota at the time, and I found a professor there who took a personal interest in my family's story and was able to help me. Every week, I would go to his office with 2 or 3 of the letters, and he would read them out loud into a little tape recorder, and I would take them home and transcribe them. It was like hearing my great-grandmother's voice. Sometimes I almost expected a letter in the mailbox from her. She wasn't trying to tell me a story, but in her voice, I heard the echoes of my mom and my grandma, a worry-soaked love, and I heard her anguish and her desire to be reunited with her loved ones, wanting to be able to hold her granddaughter. They were a long and exhausting lament, coupled with lots of practical concerns, like what should we do with the piano? You forgot your red dress. Should we sell the pots and pans? As I said, I was in graduate school at the time, and I made this my project. I approached it as a memoir and tried to weave the letters through with my own memories and observations. But it didn't really work because I was in my 20s, and I think I didn't quite have enough to say. I hadn't lived long enough, maybe. But I believed so strongly, and I still do, that in a world where there are Holocaust deniers, we have such a strong and specific obligation to tell the truth. So after I got my MFA, I moved back to Milwaukee with my husband, and I abandoned this project. I started writing other things. I like to say I wrote some lighter novels about betrayal and infidelity. But of course, this story stayed with me and wouldn't leave me alone. For years, my husband would kind of nudge me and say, when are you going to return to that book? And I would say confidently, never. But of course, it was cooking in my brain the whole time, simmering on a low heat. I was finally inspired to go back to it a few years ago when we learned about the Muslim ban that the previous administration had instituted. And I felt like I was so struck by it, and as we all were, I think, but so sort of jarred and triggered by it. I felt like the past is always with us, and we're making some of the same mistakes. And I suddenly felt like this story that I have to tell is newly relevant, and it's time for me to tell it. So I figured out, after some prodding from more than one person who reminded me that I had already written 3 novels, that this story would work better as fiction, which cracked the whole thing open for me. I realized I could stay true to my family's story. I could use the letters that I had found, and in fact, I do weave them through the novel, and they're word for word. I didn't change any of those, but I could stay true. So I could stay true to my great grandmother's words, but I could fully invent these characters. For example, the novel, much of the novel takes place in a bakery. My grandparents owned a butcher shop. And I just felt like if I'm going to be spending years working on this novel as a lifelong vegetarian, I'm going to change the butcher shop to a bakery. It was much more pleasant. I did lots of research on the time period. I read a lot of history books. I had gone to Germany with my family and visited the town where my grandmother was from, and where my mom was born, and then the other small town where my grandfather was from. This was before I really knew I was working on this book. It was just kind of, it was in my head at the time, but I didn't really fully realize I was going to be writing this book. So I call that research now. In retrospect, I didn't intend it to be research, but we were there in Germany, and I was just soaking in the sounds and the sights and paying attention to the way the light fell and the smells that surrounded me. So that was one way that I kind of immersed myself in, and I did other research, and that all gave me the confidence to embrace this story as historical fiction. I love doing the historical research, which surprised me. I loved it when I had the most specific question, like what kind of shoes would a woman be wearing in 1937? And I could find the answer. I began to understand these characters from the inside and the outside. And in that way, I was able to tell my family's story without limiting myself. I could invent a character, for example, who closely resembled my grandmother. But of course, I could never know what my grandmother was actually thinking as she said goodbye to her mother in 1938. So as a fiction writer, I could give her traits and thoughts and ideas, and that in that way, her story came to life. So after a few years of work, I handed in a draft of this book to my editor, thinking I was done, but she felt like a piece of the story was missing, which ironically was the contemporary story, the story I had tried to write while I was in grad school. I found myself reluctant to go back to it. I don't know why, but once I realized that my editor was right, I reconnected with that piece of the story, which was, of course, the part I felt the closest to. And by this time, I had 2 daughters of my own, so it felt like I had a totally different perspective than I'd had 25 years ago as a mother and a daughter, on this girl who was trying to figure out who she was in relation to her family's history, trying to figure out how to live in the world, not to escape the story her family gave her, but to both embrace it and transcend it. So that's the overview. That's the presentation of the book. And now I'm really happy to have a conversation with Stacy and take questions. And
oh, thank you so much, Lauren, for that. It's so wonderful to hear just the connections with your family. And just imagine the silence when your grandfather said no. And and I love that in your writing too. Just the descriptions were so beautiful, achingly beautiful. So one of the questions I wanted to start with was just a big congratulations. So congratulations on the Read with Jenna selection. So one of my colleagues shared that she purchased the book specifically because of the Read for Jenna, and she's so glad that she did. So will you tell us a little bit about how you heard that big news and what does it mean to be a featured author? We want to live vicariously through you.
I want to live vicariously through me. It was such an amazing, this is my 4th book, so I know kind of both sides of what it is to be a fiction writer. And so many amazing books come out and all at the same time. And so it's really, really hard for one book to get a little bit of spotlight and attention. And Jenna Bush is a champion of contemporary literary fiction. I found out, my agent called me. Actually, my agent and my editor were like dueling to call me. My agent left a message on my cell phone, my editor left a message on my cell phone, and my agent called me on my landline, and she reached me, and this was like right after Thanksgiving, and she was like, "Don't go to your computer, stay right where you are. I have something to tell you." And I had been doing dishes, which kind of in retrospect was ironic because I feel like the book is so much about domestic life. And so I was like, my hands were wet and I was like, what's going on? And she said, "You're a Read with Jenna pick." And I think, and so I was like screaming and dancing around, and my kids were in virtual school and they came downstairs like, "What's going on?" And she was like, "Don't tell anyone, don't tell your daughters." And they were both standing in my doorway like, "What's going on?" So of course I told them. I had to tell my mom, I had to tell my parents. But it was a huge secret, and my husband. But other than that, nobody knew. It was like 2 months of, almost 3 months of keeping the secret. It was so hard, and I was so like, it was just the most exciting thing that's ever happened in my career. It was really, really fantastic because she just shines her light on these books, and they're going to get more attention than they would get otherwise. So.
Oh, wonderful! How exciting! So some more questions about the book. So as it jumped from different times, did you have an easier time slipping into some of the four protagonists' time periods and cultures than others? So I'd suspect that the generation closest to you, and you kind of mentioned this, close to your own would be easier to write about than about women in Nazi Germany. But if you could tell us about that.
So the story is loosely based on the parallels are, so my great grandmother Frida, and there's a character in the book named Clara. This will just confuse you, but I'm going to say it anyway. And then my grandmother Ilsa is kind of the parallel to Annalise in the book. And then my mom and Ruth, and then I'm the character who most closely resembles me is Claire in the book. But it is fiction. And as I said, I had written this memoir that I wasn't pleased with, and so actually it wasn't really Claire's story that was easiest to slip into. I mean, once I started writing it and once I sort of finally realized that that was going to be an important part of the novel, and once I embraced it, I had a good time with it. But it surprised me how much I love doing the research. And when I felt sort of a little bit confident that I understood the time period, I really loved writing Annalise. I just felt like I was imagining her and having a conversation with her. I had the most, I mean, I don't know if fun is the right word because it's a hard story to write, but it was most satisfying to write her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And then, so sorry, just jumping back to that excitement of going to the, doing your research. You talk about doing the research and going to Germany. Beyond the research that you did at the U of M, how have libraries influenced you, and what kind of research did you did? I'm throwing questions together. So you did some of your research and translation at the University of Minnesota. What other kind of research did you do?
So years ago, I had visited the Holocaust Museum and the library that's attached to the museum in DC. Before I knew, this was like right when I was working on the memoir version of the story. So I spent some time there researching the specifics of what actually happened to members of my family. And most of the other research I did was just reading as much as I could about the time period. There's a book that was really influential for me called Between Dignity and Despair, specifically about women in Germany in the years leading up to the war. I learned so much about, I mean, I guess I didn't know that the project of the Nazis in the early part of their reign was to squeeze Jews out of economic life in Germany. So they really wanted Jews to leave Germany. And so it was sort of a different experience than it was in the rest of Europe, because once their project had reached the rest of Europe, the idea was just to like eliminate the population. But it made sense in my family, in relation to my family story, that what they were trying to do in the earlier part of the 1930s was to just make daily life unlivable for them. So I really used that part of my research and kind of really poured that into the novel. Just the way they were squeezed out and made to feel uncomfortable and unwanted, and economically, their lives became impossible, so that they would leave.
Mm-hmm. So tying to that, how was the process of writing this work of historical fiction across multiple time periods different than your previous novels?
So my previous 3 novels are contemporary fiction, but I didn't know I was specifically writing historical fiction. I just knew that I was trying to tell this story. So, I mean, it was a different process because it involved more research and less actual observation of daily life, which is sort of how I accumulate details for the contemporary fiction, just looking around and taking notes. So it was different that way, but it was more like I was just kind of, I knew I wanted to tell this story. So I was kind of like, the historical part of it was just like kind of filling in the blanks and setting the scene.
Oh, wow. Did writing this book change any of your feelings about your family or their experiences?
It didn't change any of my feelings about my family, but I feel like I got to know the outside forces that were, putting pressure on these people I didn't know. And well, I guess my grandparents as well, but before they were my grandparents. So it didn't, it just illuminated, it illuminated their context, like I still, they were just incredibly loving people who loved us and didn't really want to talk about where they had come from. So it just allowed me to create the story. I definitely, my feelings about them are the same, but I didn't understand the extent of the external pressures they were under.
Wow. Has your not entirely fictional story inspired any Holocaust survivors to get in touch with you or share their stories?
So in the couple weeks since the book came out, I've been getting lots of emails from people, and interestingly, the personal stories that people want to share are a little more, they're a little broader than I thought they would be. They haven't all specifically been stories about the Holocaust, but they've been like a lot of like immigration stories. And I think what people seem to be connecting to is the sense of that, like the sense of that history and how it's passed down. Not necessarily, it hasn't been all Jewish people and it hasn't been all Holocaust stories at all, but it's just been a lot of like, these are the hardships that my ancestors went through, and this is, how I connected to your story. So I think that's kind of cool.
Oh, wow. Can you talk a little bit more about those actions and emotions that were passed down with generations? One of the statements in your book was the habit of furtive whispering that will never go away. And that just struck me as something that keeps going. And then just fear and love. Can you talk about how you use those emotions and about everything that was passed down?
So so much of this book, I've been talking about it for a couple of weeks now, and I just realized this like on Friday in a conversation, that so much of this book is like a conversation with my great grandmother's letters. Like she would say, I would read something. I really metabolize these letters. They have been a part of me for 25 years. So she would say something like, in one of her letters, she says, "Why is that poor child crying so?" And I know what she's talking about because my mom has a picture of herself as a 2-year-old on the ship. She's holding her parents' hands and she's wailing. So I knew the picture she was referring to. So I then was able to create a scene in the book where they're on the ship on their way to America, and Annalise pulls Ruth away from a little friend she's made, and Ruth starts sobbing, and then somebody wants to take a picture of the family. So like, I don't know if this is exactly answering your question, but so much of the little pieces of the letters became broader scenes in the book, and I was able to sort of kind of use the nonfiction to create the fictional scene, and then that kind of like ping back to the nonfiction. And so all of this I feel like is part of what gets handed down to us.
Wow. So did your mom read the book? What did she think about the stories?
She's read the book, I think 4 times now. She'll be like, "I'm reading it again. I'm crying again." Like she's, they're delighted and happy. And I think she's happy that this story is being told. Like I think she's so connected to the story, but even more so, she's just connected to the people who raised her. And so I think it's a good thing that there's another generation of distance between the story and me as the writer. Like I don't think that this was the story she could have told. So I think she's glad I'm telling it.
Wonderful. So, can you share a little bit about your path to becoming a writer, and maybe something that isn't necessarily in the blurb that we get to read?
I can tell you so many things about my path to becoming a writer. I feel like it's ongoing, because after every book I write, I think, okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm not a writer anymore. Like I think that the path to becoming a writer is endless, and I'm working really hard on like not having that voice in my head that says, you are actually, that's it, you're done. So I'll tell you a couple of things. I wrote a book between my first novel and my second novel, like 100 pages of book. But I was pregnant with my second daughter at the time, so all the characters, and I for some reason decided I didn't need to outline this book. So all the characters do in this book is sit around complaining about how tired they are. So that book is in a drawer. Let's see. I sent my first book out to probably 50 agents before one decided to take me on and represent me. So the path to becoming a writer is crowded with failure. And like, I don't know if I would do it. I don't know if I could do it again. I just kept, this was like before, like pre-internet. So I would just send out the query and like 10 pages of the novel. And then like a month later, it would come back to me rejected, and I'd send it out again, and it went on forever. So
Wow.
that's a big piece of my path to becoming a writer. I had an English teacher in high school who said, Lauren, some people are writers and some people are readers, and you are a reader. So my whole, so that's another piece of the path, proving her wrong.
Oh, wow.
I
Um,
know.
this kind of leads into just talking about what writers, since you're a reader as well, what writers influenced you as what did you read that influenced you as a writer?
Um, I don't really think I was a voracious reader until kind of when I was a young adult. I mean, I read a lot as a kid, but I really didn't become the reader that I am now until I was in my late teens, early 20s. And the kind of had a floundering year between college and graduate school, and I was back home in Milwaukee, like not knowing what I was supposed to be doing. And I went to the library near my parents' house, and I started at A in the fiction section. And I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing with myself or where I'm going to go from here, but I'm going to start. And I started at A and read. I think I read all the way to H. I mean, not every single book on the shelf, but I was just like, reading just saved me. I Let's see. I'll tell you what I'm reading right now, and then I'll take a minute and think about who has influenced me. So many writers have influenced me, but right now I'm reading Monogamy by Sue Miller, which is something completely different from what I've been working on. I read We Were the Lucky Ones by Georgia Hunter, which was a book I recommended because on the Today Show with when I was on last week with Read with Jenna. Such a weird thing to say. So that, because that book and mine have a lot of thematic overlap, and also it's just a beautiful book. What else am I reading right now? I read two books that haven't come out yet because they were written by friends of mine. One is called The Cape Doctor by Ellen Levy. That's coming out in the summer, and it's historical fiction. And then my friend and co-member of my writing group here in Milwaukee, Anurala Rajakar, has written a YA novel called American Betia. So I just reread that. I like to have one book upstairs and one book downstairs. So I always have two books going at once. So let's see. And who's influenced me? William Trevor, for sure. He's mostly his short stories, but also the novel, The Story of Lucy Galt. He's an Irish, well, he died a couple of years ago, but he's an Irish short story writer. My short stories were my first love. Who else? I'll think about it and I'll remember in like 5 minutes. So could you go to the next question, and then I'll come back.
So there is a question that kind of relates to this. Are you a fan of World War II era historical fiction generally? And did any of books of that sort inspire you?
Not really. It's not. I'm kind of am now, and I'm going to read The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna just because I want to. But it really, I feel like I was new to the genre when I started writing it.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
not. Yeah. I mean, I really love contemporary literary fiction. I really wasn't a historical fiction aficionado.
So much range you're showing.
I mean, I just feel like it's my job to read as much as it is to write. Like I feel like I'm always in conversation with other writers in my head. Like I mean, I'm all like, it feels like if I can grab an hour a day to read, that's just the work I do. Like it's part of being a writer.
And a librarian.
Right?
Yeah. So you mentioned the University of Minnesota libraries, and you mentioned that you visit the Milwaukee Library. It saved you. How else have libraries influenced you as a writer and a reader?
Well, as a writer who has never made very much money, if I spent all the money that I would like to on books, I would be completely broke. So I use the local library here all the time. They're doing a great job during the pandemic. They're doing curbside. So I just type in what I want and then drive over and get it. They've been amazing. I think all libraries have just risen to the occasion and have proven have illuminated how crucial they are to our communities. But I would just be sunk without the library here. And when the pandemic started, I think like a lot of people, I couldn't concentrate. I mean, I was watching bad reality TV and that was like the most I could focus. And then I read Lily King's Writers and Lovers. Have you read that?
I haven't yet.
Yeah, so that was the first book, and that was a library book. It was the first book I read that like brought me back to myself, you know.
Ooh, I'll have to get that one on my list now after I finish
um,
all of yours.
so yeah, I'm an avid user of our local library.
Oh, that's so wonderful to hear. So jumping a little bit back into Send for Me, there was a question that said, is anyone else in your family attached to these heirloom letters? Did you have someone like that to bounce feelings and ideas off of?
My mom, it's her story as well. And I think she would have, it was hard for her, but I sometimes would offer her the opportunity to listen to or to read my transcription or to listen to the transcribed letters. And it was hard for her. She was closer to it than I was. But, you know, and like I said, she couldn't read them because they were written in this old fashioned German script, but she's very attached to them. And I mean, it was her grandmother and the grandma she never knew. Oh, I'll show you. I have a photocopy of the letters. You'll
Oh,
see.
wonderful.
You can't they're like, you can't make them out. They're like, I think her handwriting is beautiful, but they don't look like letters, right? They look sort of like scratches up and down on the page. So yeah, that's
Yeah, I have some old letters of my grandma's in Norwegian, and yeah,
it's amazing.
it is.
It's an amazing artifact. But she like I've said this before, but my great grandmother wasn't trying to tell a coherent story. You know, she wasn't like, this is my legacy. She was, you know, throughout most of the letters, they were written between 1938 and 1941. She thought she thought they could leave. Like it was her, you know, and then the letters kind of, the desperation in the letters increases as the years go by. So it's not like she wasn't telling a story. She was like, you know, begging my grandmother to do what she could to get out, and she was trying to, you know, talk about her daily life, and at the same time saying like, you need to do this and this and this, and you know, so they're more like they're unusual that way.
Oh, oh. So, quick plug for Club Book, your faves, Lily King and Sue Miller both have Club Book podcasts available in our archive. So if people wanted to check those out, and this session will be archived as well. Going back to writing, how is the process and career of writing different during COVID?
Well, my kids are in school from home, so I mean, it's so different. I think just I, as a writer, really cultivate boredom for myself and in my life. And so, because I feel like it gives me the mental space to like use my imagination and just to go places. COVID for all of us, I mean, it's been a year now, like it just descended, like a dark cloud just descended. It's been really distracting. And, you know, we've all been like in a place of fear and anxiety. And so it's been a challenge for me to get back to work. And my kids, like I said, my kids are here and they're great and they know to leave me alone while I'm working, but they also need things. Like it's been really hard for them too. You know, we were talking earlier, we both have teenage daughters and, you know, I want to be here for them during this unprecedented, you know, difficult time. So my routine has been sort of out the window, but I'm taking notes and trying to remember that I am a writer. So hopefully I'll come back to it. But I think everybody's in the same boat. It's been really hard. It's just been so hard to concentrate.
Right. How was your routine? You say you have your routine. How was your routine pre-COVID?
I used the hours that my children were in school to write. I would just sit down at as if, but I would sit down at my computer at 8 and, you know, get up at 3 and also get up a million times between 8 and 3 to like make coffee and do the dishes and stuff. But that was my, like, nobody was in the house. And so that was my writing time. And I had this application on my computer called Freedom that would disconnect me from the internet. I didn't always use it, but that was a good thing to remove the playground of the internet from my computer.
Oh, I'll have to look into
Yeah,
that.
because like you can't do it. It's really difficult to do it yourself. It's nice to have a program that switches off the internet.
Oh, wow. Um, so thinking about that, thinking about just the fear and anxiety that we're experiencing during COVID, and I mean, don't want to compare it to the fear and anxiety of Nazism, but something in the story when you get to Claire and she's talking about that fear of getting into a relationship and everything. How I mean, how does that, I don't want to ask a too personal question, but is that, did you feel that that kind of string coming from your grandmother as you grew up?
From my mom, and I think, well, okay, I think obviously it's not comparable to what people are going through in Germany in the 30s, but we are really like the sense of missing one another, the sense of missing the people we love. I haven't seen my parents in a year. I mean, I see them. They drive. I live 10 minutes away, and they'll drive over every day and like wave from their car. But um, missing people we love is, I think, um, kind of taps into that. That's the familiar feeling. But to answer your question, the that part of the story, the part of the story that where Claire feels this intense connection and obligation to her family. I mean, that's ripped from the headlines. I definitely felt that and have felt it all my life. And Claire, without giving away anything about the book, she is fiction, and fiction. She is fictionalized, and her story is different from mine. She goes down a different path. I mean, like I said, I live 10 minutes away from my parents, and I used to joke when I lived in Minneapolis that all I wanted to do was move home, have a couple babies, and hand them over to my parents, which I did.
It's an excellent, it's so much fun to hand them to the grandparents and get a
Oh
little
my gosh.
break.
Yeah, and also I always used to say, I mean, they're older, my kids are older now, but I used to say they were in better hands with my parents than they were with me. Safer, more closely watched, better fed. But yeah, the short answer to that is yes, I definitely felt the pull.
So we have another question coming from the Facebook group. Your contemporary fiction feels autobiographical at times. Isabel Moore in Days of Awe seems so real to me. If not yourself, did you base her on anyone?
I mean, I can I don't remember. No, um yes, I mean I think especially when a writer uses first person, which I did in my three contemporary novels, it's easy to think this first person narrator must be the author. Of course she is and she isn't, and I'm writing sort of through my own eyes and giving my observations to this character, and her voice is kind of my voice. So but it's also the pleasure of being a fiction writer is just creating characters and creating, there are always people talking to me in my head. That's like that's what I find the most fun about writing fiction. The main characters are little pieces of everybody I know and love. When I wrote my first book, there's a mother character in the book, and I was so worried that my mom would read it and be like, this is me, you can't publish this. But she was like, Lauren, of course I know it's fiction. Like there's just that's the line. Like it's fiction and it's nonfiction, and everybody's a little piece of me in my books.
Fun, fun. That I just love that. I really loved the phrase that you said earlier. Was it curated boredom? Is that, I think you said,
That's
but making sure that you have time for your imagination to create these characters.
yeah.
Another person asked, did you write every day?
I never get too worked up about whether or not I write every day. I try to, but some days, like my daughter quoted this back to me the other day because my husband is working on a book as well, and she was like, "Dad, some days are 3-page days, some days are 3-sentence days." I was like, "Oh, how did you, oh, that's me. You know, I think some days it's just really hard and some days it comes easier, but I'm always thinking and taking notes. I think the most, somebody asked me for my like my best advice on, you know, process and how to be a writer. And really, it's that I try to live as a writer in the world. Like I try to observe and pay attention and, you know, not let the daily tasks that we're all confronted with overwhelm the part of me that's a writer and that's paying attention. I
Wow.
completely forgot what the original question was. Do I write every day? So no, not really, but I try to.
Another process question came through. What say have you had in choosing cover art for your books? I have a
Oh, I love that question because I love this cover so much. Oh, you're holding it up. I was just about to hold it up. It's
that one.
it's I have, they say I have some say in the cover and they like will send me cover suggestions, but I secretly don't think I do. Um, the original cover of Send for Me um, was a bakery case. I wish I had a picture of it or like a mock-up of it, but it was an arm. It was kind of, it was a really cool painting. It was like an arm, and so it was like a sort of like a cut off torso. That sounds bad, but it was like half of a body and the arm extending down into a case of really yummy looking pastries. And I don't know if I loved it. It was a beautiful painting, and I don't know if it made sense for my book. And then at Knopf, my publishing house, they started sending out the book to the sales reps, and they all came back and said this cover doesn't really work. The book is historical fiction, and the cover doesn't really work. So they went back to the drawing board and came back with this cover. And when I saw this cover, I went like that. It just feels so. This cover feels really right to me. So and the cover of Days of Awe was the original cover was a pointillist painting of a woman's face. Like you almost, when you were really close to it, you couldn't see that it was a face. And then if you pulled away, you could. And also that went out into the world a little bit and people didn't really respond to it. And I think that somebody high up at Barnes and Noble was like, you need a different cover. So they went, I mean, so I think there's like interplay between the heart of the book and the way that the publisher wants it to be received in the world. So I don't have that much say, but other people do.
Yeah, well, I love this cover too. I think the scene where Clara and Ruth, the last time they're together, is just
Yes.
one of the most powerful in the book. And every time I look at this, I just like get that feeling like, oh, I just want to cry and I want to hug my mom and I want to hug my grandma. So
Yeah,
yes.
that the cover feels like it is just taken from that scene in the book. That just felt like a stroke of good luck to get that cover.
So we do have a not a question.
And not a
Somebody
question.
wanted to share. They read Days of Awe last summer and have told many it was my top read in 2020. So they
Thank
just
you.
wanted to let you know that it was one of their top reads.
Thanks.
And then another one. What do you miss most about Minnesota as a person or as a writer?
Oh, I miss Minnesota so much. I have so many friends from the creative writing program that I'm still really close to. I miss, my husband and I met there, and sometimes we talk about this like, do we miss Minneapolis or do we miss being in our 20s in Minneapolis? You know, I miss
Hmm.
it's a really, Milwaukee feels like a quieter city to me. And I don't know, maybe that's because I have kids and so my life is quieter, but I miss how lively Minneapolis felt to me then. And I miss the full dedication I was able to have while I was in Minneapolis to being a writer. I mean, I was in grad school for I think longer than I should have been, but I was fully, you know, that's what I was when I was in Minneapolis. It was like how I was figuring out, you know, what the rest of my life was going to look like. So I miss that whole sense of myself that I had when I was in Minneapolis. And I really loved the book community. The do you remember the Hungry Mind? That was the bookstore in St. Paul. That was where all the like cool book events were when we were there.
Oh, fun.
Oh, and there was a Thai restaurant in St. Paul. I really missed that. I can't remember what it was called.
Well, we love going out for Thai and going. If you think of it, let us know.
I think it might be gone. This was like 25 years ago.
Oh. Do you have any other famous fans that you're aware of other than Jenna?
I don't know. I don't think so. Very happy with Jenna.
Wonderful. Oh, so thinking back to the book and sometimes I think a lot about the mother-daughter relationship, and in a lot of the reviews of your books, that mother-daughter relationship has been so important. How has your relationship, just relationships within your family, influenced the different stories?
So I touched on this earlier in our conversation. Um, I think I couldn't write the story. Um, Maybe someone else could have, but I think I couldn't have written the story until I had daughters of my own. I feel like I needed the perspective, not just of a daughter, but also of a mother. Um, it's, I mean, it's definitely a relationship I spend a lot of time thinking about, just because both being a daughter and being a mother are so like just so like prominent in my life. You know, they're those attachments are hugely important to me. Um, and yeah, um I don't know. I think maybe that was part of why I couldn't write this as a memoir, because I didn't have children of my own. I mean, you can, as a mother, you just can sort of, part of the battle is pushing away some of the like scarier feelings about like bad things happen. You know what I mean? So it's just easier to access when you have your own kids, and you're constantly, there's like a, your kids are growing up and they're constantly moving a little bit farther away from you, and that's just, it's really easy to access that, but like the joy and heartbreak of that.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
So I can absolutely see this book adapted for the screen. Not unlike Kristen Hanna's The Nightingale is finally seeing a deserved movie adaptation later this
Right.
year. Has there been any talk for SFM or for Send For Me or any of your other previous novels? And would you
No,
be open to that?
I would be open to that. Of course, like I lined that at night, quietly casting my books as movies. But no, there hasn't been any conversation about that really.
So we'll try to do what we can. Get that
Yeah,
moving forward.
get your production company on it. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Dream casting. So who have you been dream casting into this book?
I feel like Natalie Portman would have a role in the movie. I'm not sure, I
She
guess
is
I'd
a
leave
big
it up to
library
her.
supporter.
Oh, there you go. There it is. My
Ooh.
friend in my friend in Minneapolis used to joke that like years ago when it was still a memoir, she's like, they're gonna make this into a movie, and they're gonna cast Meryl Streep as the hand that's writing. We still, like, for years we still joke about the hand. But I don't actually think Meryl Streep would be the hand.
So are you working on anything at present you would like to share with your readers?
I am just right now just taking notes. I have a couple of baby ideas kind of pecking their way out, but nothing I feel like I could even articulate yet.
Well, good to hear. So we're hoping, glad to hear that after this book, you didn't say, no, I'm not a writer
Done.
anymore.
I'm not a writer. I did say that, but trying not to. I hope that it will be less than 25 years before my next one comes out.
And focusing hopefully more on contemporary fiction again, or did you catch the historical bug?
Kind of like I really loved, like I said, I really love doing the research, and so maybe historical fiction. I feel like it is a little like maybe it was always in my toolbox, but I really used it this time, and I feel like I'm gonna take it out again.
Awesome.
That's a non-answer. Maybe.
Maybe. Can't tell you. I'm keeping my secrets. That's perfectly fine. So when you were doing that research, did you find archivists that were really receptive to your requests? Or I don't understand that question. I'll have David clarify it. But as you were looking with your research and archivists, were they receptive to your request for research?
Yeah, I think I understand that question. I reached out to, when I had specific questions, I reached out to people I knew or not necessarily people I knew, but like I have, like my niece works at the Holocaust Museum, so I used her as a resource, and she connected me with somebody. And my husband is an English professor at UWM, so he knew people in the history department. So it was more like I had people to rely on for like some granular questions about historical veracity, and everybody was so happy to help me and so delighted.
Oh, wonderful.
They're you know, that's a group of, they're like, you know, they love history, so they were really thrilled to help with to it, you know, without exception.
I think the question was saying receptive or dismissive because it was fiction. So
Oh,
good to
huh.
hear that they were so excited. And
Yeah.
really, it's history. It gets us all excited about history. So, so as another question, do you and your husband beta read each other's stuff, or who are your
Um,
beta readers?
so I'm like a little nervous to show him my work until it's pretty good, or you know, or until I feel pretty good about it. Because I take his suggestions to heart. And so if he says, like, if he scratches his face, I'll be like, what didn't you like? You know? So I wait till later in the game to let him or ask him to read my stuff. And then I'm in a writing group here that is just phenomenal. And so they're really the only ones who they have, like, you know, unlimited access to the inner workings of my skull. I mean, so they're the ones who read it page by page and who talk me through it. And so that's like just a few other people. And then when it gets to a point where I'm willing to give it to my husband, I give it to a few other people. Mostly people back from the University of Minnesota who are reliable, wonderful critics.
So you touched on this a little bit earlier, but what advice do you have for a newbie writer? And in particular, a newbie writer looking at MFA programs and writer clubs at this moment.
My husband and I were just talking about that earlier today because he is coordinating the creative writing program here. It's so I really loved my time at the University of Minnesota because, like I said before, it was just such an uncluttered time and space to write. So I know people have different opinions about MFA programs, but I am a huge fan. It was just like, it's such a gift to have that time. It's really nice to have funding because writers tend not to be, you know, tend not to make a ton of money. So it's really nice not to go into debt. And so I am a huge advocate of MFA programs if that's something you can swing. And advice, I don't know. Like I said, I try to give myself a break if I can't write every day and just live in the world like a writer, take lots of notes. I tell this to my kids, but to me too, like look up from your phone, you know, pay attention to the world, eavesdrop on conversations, and just, you know, I read a couple years ago that Alice Munro retired, you know, from being a writer. And oh, she's a huge influence. Back to that question. But she retired. And I remember thinking at the time, like, what does that mean? How do you retire? Like, I guess you don't write anymore. But I think I remember thinking at the time, oh, she's probably just like taking a breath and like not being so, like not living in two minds at once, you know, like she's probably, like, I think being a writer can be kind of it can be a little tiring to live in the world that way, to live as a person in the world and also a writer in the world. But I think it's really important for writers to be constantly paying attention.
Wow. So does a best-selling author seek her own blurbs, or did your publicist arrange that at all? And were there
So that's
positive? Go ahead.
sorry. I that's kind of a collaborative effort. You know, the my agent and my editor and I would come together, and you know, they would say, do you know anybody who might be willing? And Christina Baker Klein is someone I've been friends with for a long time, so she gave me a blurb. But then I didn't really know historical fiction, so they found the other blurbs. Just, you know, I think they sent it out to many more people than actually ended up blurbing the book. You know, everybody kind of comes together to see who will read it and who would make the most sense to blurb it.
Oh, fun. Was there any positive reactions that made you really happy?
Any positive
Like blurbs or other things that popped up?
I mean, people are so generous, and so every blurb was just like amazing and wonderful. And you know, I always understand if people can't do it, but the ones who do, I'm just so grateful.
Oh, wow. Do you get to blurb people too?
Yeah, I get a lot of manuscripts that are 6 months away from being published.
Oh, fun, fun. I always love getting those advanced reader copies. It's like, ooh,
Yeah,
me first,
I know.
but not that early.
I know, it's the nerdiest thing. It's like, I got a present in the mail. It's a book.
Thank you, publishers. Oh, how fun. So, so I think we may have asked you this already. What are you reading now?
Oh yeah. Well, so like I said, I have an upstairs book and a downstairs book, and so I'm almost done with Monogamy by Sue Miller, and excuse me. I don't know what I'm gonna start next. I feel like I have The Yellow Bird Sings by Jennifer Rossner, and I think I'm gonna do an event with her. She also blurbed my book, so I've been meaning, that's been on my list. So I think that might be next. I'm excited
Oh.
about that one. And then this is my friend's book, and it's coming out March 9th, and I'm doing an event with her. It's called American Bitch. Yeah. Does it look backwards to you? I don't understand Zoom.
It does not. Mine look
Oh, okay.
backwards to me,
But it doesn't look
but
backwards
this
to
one looks
you.
good.
So it's a Y. I love reading YA, and I love the author of this book. And so well, I just have to, I have read it, but I'm gonna go, that's my current book.
Well, I'm in a YA book club. We'll have to grab that one next.
Yeah, do.
So one last question from the group. After so many years with your family stories, are you sad to be done telling the story, or are you ready to move on to something less personal?
Yes. I'm It's such a good question. And I kind of feel like writers are obsessive people generally, and I sort of feel like I've like exercised this story in a way, and I feel a little bereft and a little empty, which is probably good. That means there's space for something else to like take root. But so yeah, I'm glad that it's out there, and I'm glad I'm finished telling it. And I also am sort of like, okay, I'll just stand in the sunshine and wait for what's going to come next. That's not how it happens. But I am looking forward to moving on to another story.
Wow, well, we're just wrapping up now. Are you any final words for our viewers out there?
I just gave you the image of me standing in the sunshine waiting for inspiration. I think that's my
That can be our guiding light out. Well, Lauren, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us this evening, and for just being gracious and wonderful, and for creating these amazing stories that we get to read.
Oh, thank you.
I told you this when we first met, but that first couple pages, they grabbed me and pulled me in, and I just loved the whole story and the whole ride. So thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much. Thank
And it's
you.
already spurred conversations with my mom. So I just thank you for giving that gift to us.
Thanks. That's so nice. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's all we have for this evening. So thanks again, Lauren, for penciling us into your busy spring. This, this has been a virtual presentation of Club Book, a long-running literary series of Melsa, made possible by the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Special thanks again to Anoka County Library for the part they played in bringing Lauren to us. Before you log off, look for the Club Book survey link, which is in the comments and will be projected in place of my video momentarily. And then last, consider joining Club Book on Wednesday, March 10th for a talk with mental health advocate and one of Minnesota's best known radio personalities, John Moe. John will talk about his book, The Hilarious World of Depression, and podcast series of the same name. This one will be co-hosted by Carver County Library, and as always, it's free. They'll be right here on Facebook Live. Have a great night, everyone.